This teaching was originally live streamed June 2020 from Menla Retreat and Dewa Spa in the heart of the Catskills. To learn more about upcoming online programs, please visit menla.org.
Conversation with Professor Thurman. He'll be doing the afternoon, most of it, kind of an hour and a half, 2 hour presentation. Then we'll have, it's a little bit open in terms of we'll have some Q&A. Maybe I'll do a little bit of presentation after him. That still remains to be seen, but that's going to be the general lay of the land. And then, yeah, we'll just see. It's a dance, and we'll just have to see how the whole thing unfolds. Hopefully we won't step on too many toes. So a couple of preparatory comments. One of the great delights and also challenges of an event like this with a nice sized group is handling the spectrum of students. There are some people who may be reasonably new to this material. Others I know have been around for 30, 40, even 50 years. And so it's always a bit, how do you find the sweet spot to make it work for everybody? And so I will try to, based on the surveys, based on your questions, based on your participation, and of course, one of the drawbacks in terms of doing this in cyberspace like this is, lack of feedback. I can't really see body language. I don't see how things are landing. I'm throwing out all these noodles and seeing if some of them stick against the wall. And so I will be presenting in what I hope is the kind of bell curve average. But at the same time, Bardo Yoga, this will be working with Bardo Yoga, is colloquially, it's stretching is good. Stretching is good for growth. And I'll talk a little bit about this kind of educational, pedagogical approach that I'm going to be taking. So if there is an error, so to speak, we're going to err a little bit on the high side so that people can then at least kind of grow in or stretch into some of the more taxing materials, because fundamentally, in many ways, that's what we want to do. And I'll say more about this with the meditations, where we want to be able to stretch our mind and heart, same word, by the way, chitta, heart, mind, into really subtle domains that may be a little bit inaccessible to us now simply because we're so contracted, mentally, physically, cognitively contracted. So we will be engaging in a host of teachings that are kind of didactically designed to stretch. And then also, I think most importantly, the meditations that will be inviting you to stretch into domains of consciousness, mind, that are correlative to the qualities of mind that we will descend into at the moment of death. And so with that said, I ask permission from some of the earlier younger students, and also same thing from the more senior students, to try to bear with me as we go through this. And because this is a yoga, there's always this very helpful, playful maxim: blessed are the flexible, for they are never bent out of shape. So let's all try to be flexible with where we're going. My approach is, you'll see, even though I'm a deep, devoted, concerted student of Tibetan Buddhism, I follow the Zen kind of adage, chase 2 rabbits, catch none. I chase the Tibetan Buddhist rabbit. But I am also a very deep student of integral theory, integral approaches, which really honor and incorporate truth wherever it comes from. Even the Buddha allegedly said, wherever you find the truth, you will find my Dharma. And so even though the core presentation, of course, will be based on this rich, voluminous teaching of Tibetan thanatology. Thanatology is the study of death and dying, comes from the Greek god Thanatos. And so even though that's the core template, as you'll see, I go all over the map. I will be bringing in some neuroscience, some cognitive science, some philosophy, some psychology, as a way to kind of integrate and contextualize these teachings, because in addition to the brilliant kind of traditional translation projects of which Dr. Thurman is just so proficient, there's also the invitation and challenge of how do we take these amazing teachings and bring them into our Western contexts. And sometimes, in fact, I've heard a number of younger Tibetan tulkus, masters, talk about the principal kind of paradigms or cultural containers of the West are psychology and science. And so how do we translate this incredible body of teachings without editing, without tripping off into spiritual materialism and basically diluting, watering the teachings down to make them more digestible for us? And so that's a little bit of the challenge, is translating these teachings without editing them, because I'll be sending you some text we'll be contemplating that talk about chariots and elephants and the like. Well, I don't live in a world of chariots and elephants. I live in the world of Amazon and Netflix and Google. And so when we engage in some of the contemplations in particular, and I will be sending you about a 4,000 word document that I wrote specifically for you all. I wrote this for this program. A really kind of my top 10 tips for contemplation, how to work with the actual art and practice of contemplation. And I'll be saying a little bit more about that and then sending that out to you today. How do we really digest this stuff into our system? And so I say this as not so much as a disclaimer, but as just a way to let you know that this is the way I roll. And I personally find it really just fruitful to cross-pollinate between so-called East and so-called West. And of course, those boundaries themselves are starting to dissolve. So a little bit of a personal thing around why I'm so passionate about sharing this material with you, and why I originally approached Menla and Professor Thurman about landing this program at Menla. I've been working with these practices, which I now call family of nocturnal meditations, which includes things like Bob Thurman was talking about yesterday, dream yoga, sleep yoga, also liminal dreaming. I'll talk to you a little bit about that. And then, of course, Bardo yoga. This is a family of nocturnal practices where nocturnal really is kind of a code word for subtle, really subtle dimensions of practice that allow us to become familiar, as I alluded to earlier, with these very subtle bandwidths of mind. And so I've been working with this stuff for over, gosh, at this point, hate to say it, another continuation day clicked by. It's a little scary how fast they fly, but for decades, many decades. And I went into a 3-year retreat almost 20 years ago as a way to really ingest, digest this material. I've been studying it for years. One of my main practices for the last 10 years has been a dark retreat. I'll talk a little bit to you about that, the difference between Sutra and Tantra dark retreat, and how that's so incredibly important around these teachings. And I have engaged in both of these deep dives, the 3-year retreat and dark practice, not only as a way to really bring these teachings into my system, but also as a way to work with fear. And I will be talking at some length about this thing called fear as a way to establish a relationship to it. Because one of the main reasons, of course, that we're so afraid of death, many of us anyway, at the end of life, is because we just don't know. I mean, fear is virtually synonymous with ignorance. And so I personally have used fear as a kind of sign for where to go for growth. Life is very short, it's very precious. For me, it's been like, if you really want to grow in this life, go to the places that scare you. Pema Chodron has made a virtual career out of this. Go to the places that scare you, because fear is kind of the affective expression of ignorance. And ignorance itself, by definition, is a little bit difficult to unearth, because it's a little bit like a fish living in water. You don't really understand the medium in which you are embedded because you're so close to it. So it's a little bit like looking at the inside of your eyelid. It's so close to you, you paradoxically can't see it. And so as a way to establish a relationship to fear, as a way to prepare for the end of life, I undertook these deep dives, and then just became kind of almost fanatically obsessed in learning everything I could about Tibetan thanatology, literally reading every book in print. And the great gift to me was when I was doing research for my book, Preparing to Die, I had the great good fortune, because I spent a lot of time in India and Nepal, to interview a number of amazing Tibetan Buddhist masters. And it was really extraordinary how just their mere presence their kind of ease, their certitude around this topic really affected me. And I remember very clearly after about the 15th interview saying to myself, these people know something I don't. I want to know what these peeps know. And in particular, I have to share a very poignant story with Tenga Rinpoche. He's been very central to my life and my path. And I had a great honor of meeting with him. I didn't know it at the time, but just 6 months or so before he died. And it was a startling encounter because I'd seen him for many, many years. And when I walked in, I mean, this amazing individual was just physically, he was just a wreck. I mean, he was blind from his diabetes. He was paralyzed. I mean, half his limbs were amputated. He was just a physical disaster. And yet he had this most playful, cheerful, childlike disposition that just floored me. I mean, here he is. His body is just like completely dissolving. And he was yet still meeting every moment with just such freshness and delight. And it really struck me, the impact of, where is this man taking refuge? Where is his mind right now as his body is literally crumbling underneath him? And so these sorts of things really inspired me to go as deep as I possibly could into this stuff. And then I started teaching on it. And I've been doing a series of weekends for 15 plus years on all three of the death bardos. And I'll give you an overview of all three of those. And then obviously we'll be concentrating on the first one, the Bardo of Dying. And then for years, starting a couple of years ago, I really decided, I want to start doing a very deep dive with people where I want to devote one entire week instead of just two weekend days. I wanted to devote an entire week to each of the bardos. And so I started this series last year at Shambhala Mountain Center. This is a little bit based on that, of course, but obviously augmented with Professor Thurman's great contributions. But so this is the first actually of a series of 4 programs, one on each of the bardos, and the last one on Tantra and Sutra Pure Land and how that relates to this tradition altogether. And I can only share, we'll see when the final exam comes along, but I spend a lot of time working with dying people. And I have, in fact, discovered a kind of ease and even confidence around this material and in particular the experiences. And so we'll see what happens when I'm actually at my deathbed. But I have to say at this point, I really don't fear it at all because the map is so compelling. That's what we'll be sharing with you. The territory that it invites through the meditations, by far the most important thing I think that we'll present to you. I have a reasonably fair confidence that I'm going to be prepared for this thing called death. So with all that said as a kind of a preamble, I want to start by briefly talking about, I'm going to approach or present to you 2 pedagogical kind of techniques or models. One is from the West and the other one's from the East. And the first one is this notion of concentric circles. If you're out there, you have to hit your mic, put it on mute. Is a favor to me, because if people start talking and your mute is off, I can hear what you're saying. So if you don't mind, make sure you're muted. Thank you.
Andrew, sorry, that was me.
Oh, that was you.
Yeah,
oh, Wyatt.
I was trying to not interrupt. It looks like we're having just a little bit of technical difficulties with this meeting.
Okay.
So we're going to have to stop this one. I'll resend out a link to everybody, and we're going to have to switch over to a webinar, unfortunately. So it'll be the same setting as yesterday.
Okay.
So I apologize to everybody for this little hiccup, but we will be back up and running in just a few minutes. So I'm going to close this one down and resend a link to everybody.
Okay.
Cool. Thank you so much. Sorry.
No worries. We'll be in a Bardo.
This Menla Online broadcast is brought to you in part through the generous support of the Tibet House US membership community and viewers like you. To learn more about the benefits of Tibet House membership, please visit our website at tibethouse.us.